Welcome back. Jacqui, I know that you and the Women's League actually were quite active in this regard, and I'm just curious as to your take on the way in which the Pistorius trial was presented in the media.
You know, the first thing that was shocking is when the media was granted permission to televise, which is their right. And the perceptions were there, you know, anybody had a right to say whatever they wanted to say. But at the center of the whole thing, we forgot that there was a family. There was a family that was still mourning, and we had to prepare them as the Women's League. Hence, when the court started, you remember during the bail, there was nobody from the Steenkamp family, and our colleagues in the PE region, they were busy comforting the family during the mourning period, and they indicated to us that as the case is coming to Gauteng, the family might not be able to make it. And we realized that it's not about giving them money to come to Gauteng or transporting them and having accommodation. It was also to look at the emotional side of it, which it was centered to that. And we lobbied as the Progressive Women's Movement of South Africa, together with the Women's League, that we make sure that we come to terms that the media will be there. They have to take a decision as a family who is going to be speaking for them. And I think they did have a strategy. But I can tell you now that for June it was difficult. Waking up in the morning that there's this that was said in the media, there's a picture or what, it was very, very difficult for them as a person who was very close to the Steenkamp family.
Now, that happens all the time. We have dreadful, I mean, the violence is unspeakable. And most people who basically are raped go to the police. Often the research indicates they're even more traumatized by the end of it than they are before. What is going on here? Why is it that we are a society that has such unspeakable gender violence? I don't think we can talk about gender equality until we get beyond that. I mean, I feel that it's almost irrelevant anything else until we actually sort this out.
And you know what is interesting for me, if one looks at the categories of violent crime from 94, 95 and look again at 2012, 2013, most of those categories of violent crime have actually decreased. So murder, for example, is down by 30%, attempted murder down by 39%.
Don't take those figures too confidently, but nonetheless, all right.
Sexual offences, however, is up by 48%. Now, that could be because more women are encouraged to come forward and report, but it could also mean that the problem has gotten worse. I mean, the last financial year, we see about 255,000 new reported cases of domestic violence, which is horrifically high.
It's incredible. That's what I'm saying. So tell me this. What's going on here?
I think, you know, it's interesting. We were talking a bit about traditional societies and issues like the traditional courts bill. But this is the thing, that the gender issues and the problematic gendered social norms cut across the rural-urban divide, they cut across race, they cut across class divides. And I think that...
Why are we worse than anybody else?
I think that our society, I mean, look...
And we are, by the way. All the figures indicate that.
I think that our society is very patriarchal in nature, and we have a gendered social order that is uncontested and very problematic, and that there's a lot of work to be done in eradicating gender equity at its root. So you can have state institutions, for example, but if we're not starting at the, you know, at the point of how boys are socialized, for example, then there's little hope. So it's about the gendered social norms where the problem essentially lies.
But surely other countries have that problem. Why is it that we, Rebecca, are so... Why is it that we look in the heart of darkness, to paraphrase Conrad, more and more? Each case gets worse than the rest, than the previous one. I mean, it is just unspeakable.
It is unspeakable. Sociologist Fatima Mir wrote in 1985 that it was totally unclear which culture was the most patriarchal. European culture, initially Indian, African culture, because as Joy's been saying, they all, it seems, this problem is endemic, it's pervasive. We're obviously a culture that comes from decades of trauma, you know, quite literally. We're a culture with one of the biggest, the Gini coefficient. We're one of the most unequal societies on earth. And I think Joy can probably back me up here that there's research to suggest that gender violence is higher in unequal, economically unequal societies.
That's true, but when I look at some other parts of Africa, it's not nearly as bad as here. And it's also true that it's not nearly as bad as here in some other unequal parts of the world. We are really at, you know, off the charts. I accept all of what you're saying. But what's going on? Is it that we're such a traumatized society from 300 years of this awful history? What's at root here?
I think we have, generations of men who were emasculated by apartheid. We have generations of white men who were forced often into a sort of perpetrator versus victim role.
Militarization.
We have on both sides these kind of toxic masculinities being forced on people, and I certainly think that hasn't helped anything. It's a hugely complex question, though, Judge, and I don't think anyone has a simple answer to
I know that, but we should be debating that more. That's why I'd like to have more programs about this, because it doesn't seem that we debate these questions in the way. Jacqui, I'm interested in your take on this.
I don't understand that you always try to be debating issues. When are we going to start looking at going down to assist people? You are talking about what is happening in the courts. The ANC Women's League, we have an advantage of being in many cases because we are board-based.
By the way, I'm not talking about the courts. I'm not talking about the courts. I'm talking about the unspeakable levels of violence that are perpetrated against women in this country on a day-by-day basis. That's what I'm concerned about.
No, that is what I'm trying to say, because we see it, because we go to courts and observe all those cases that have been coming through. And some of us have been through that. And it's more about how our magistrates have been trained. We don't know. Most of them, when you go there, you listen to how they will look at a case of rape or a case of abuse of a woman. And you'll find most of the people that are presiding there being magistrates are males. And you ask your question, are they not having problems of their own? And it doesn't start there. It starts at the police officers. When you come there to open up a case, we must not just talk about the courts. The first level entry is the police station. What are we saying about that? Are we not having problems? We are. We've seen a lot of women that will go and open up cases, and they become discouraged by the fact that when you arrive, how you are going to be treated. And there's nothing that is said, that you can say a lot of things, you can do a lot of things, but how you were made to feel is very important. That will make you be scared and go back, not to come back into the matters. And those are things that we must deal with them. That how are we treating our people when they bring
and that is,
cases
I mean,
like that.
you comment on courts from time to time. I mean, that's true.
It's totally true.
And that's why I'm saying that the Pistorius was like so different to the grinding reality that ordinary people face.
That's right. And one of the things that was different about the Pistorius case is that it was presided over by a woman. We've seen now that the latest nominations to the judges, 4 out of 23 are women. I mean, that's not good enough, Judge. 4 out of 23, that's
We're
absurd.
not fixing that particular problem, are we?
We're not. We're certainly not. And this is the problem, that at every level we just find these gender discrepancies. We find these damaging messages from the top, from politicians about women and how they should be treated. Within our parliament we see offensive remarks made to women. In the private sector, I mean, you read that stat about 26% of women being in senior management, but only 4% of CEOs are female, which is even worse. I can't think of a sphere of South African society, I mean, religious institutions, etc., that aren't touched by the same problem. It really is.
I'm afraid I have to end, and that's perhaps a good way to end. There isn't a sphere of South African society that's not touched by this problem of patriarchy. There's not one sphere of South African society that ultimately seems to have closed the gap between the reality of our society and what is a glorious aspiration in the Constitution to have a society which is non-sexist. And on top of that all, we then have what I couldn't help but not talk about, which is this extraordinary level of violence perpetrated against women on a day-by-day basis. How are we going to get on top of that? How are we going to close the gap between the constitutional promise and the reality? I'm not sure I have an answer to that. Perhaps you do, but if you've heard anything, you can judge for yourself. Goodbye.